Wine is sunlight held together by water. The poetic wisdom of the Italian physicist, philosopher, and stargazer Galileo Galilei.
Fred, you grew up in California and Italy, so I guess you had no choice but have an interest in wine. But when was the first time you really realized you liked wine?
Well, as you pointed out, I did grow up in Italy, but I was beneath the legal drinking age, and I had a chance to taste a little sip or two. But growing up in California, back when California was kind of coming of age as a major wine power, is where I really got a chance to first experience it.
I love the way you explain exploring wines is like exploring various countries.
It is. You know, each country has got great pride in the wine it produces. They have different traditions. They produce it in different ways. And particularly right now, while we're all stuck at home and we can't travel much, we can explore the world of wine and really see how different parts of the world view it and their rich histories and how they produce it.
And speaking of history, you were able to combine a number of your loves, wine, history, a job at the White House, and put that all together in this book, which, by the way, this is an absolutely beautiful book. And as far as you know, the first of its kind, right?
That's right, Deborah. I saw that many books have been written about wine, about presidents. There have even been books about music in the White House and art in the White House, but there had never been a book about wine in the White House. And it was just a rare opportunity for me, as a person with an interest in politics and presidential history and in wine, to write something about where those two interests intersect.
Now we know how somebody gets through probably one of the toughest jobs in the world. gotta have a little wine there. There are obviously presidents who loved wines, but there were some who didn't as well. Were those the presidents during Prohibition, or just some for maybe religious reasons?
Of course, we had Prohibition from 1920 to 1933 that essentially banned all alcohol in America. Although I did discover there were a few exceptions, even at the White House during that time. But before the Prohibition, there was the temperance movement. Across the country, there was this push at different times to eliminate alcohol consumption. And that fight went all the way to the White House. One of our presidents, Rutherford B. Hayes' wife, was a leader of the temperance movement. And she didn't want wine served at the White House. And it was only served on one occasion during their entire presidency. And then she drew the line. She said, no more wine. And she took all that lovely glassware and the decanters and all there in the White House collection, and she only served fruit juice out of them. And they nicknamed her Lemonade Lucy because she would only serve fruit juice at the White House.
Yeah, I would like to do some tests on that glassware and see if it really was just juice she was serving. All right. Thomas Jefferson was someone who really loved wine, took detailed notes when he had traveled to Europe. And I got kind of tickled because he would still order from his favorite vineyards, only it took a minute for it to get there as opposed to today.
He was our ambassador to France, and he spent his free time traveling the wine regions of Italy and France, Germany. And then when he came back, he brought that knowledge of wine with him, and he also used his ingenuity to figure out how to get those wines from Europe safely to the United States so they wouldn't spoil or get broken or lost along the way. Because until that time, the only wine in George Washington's time, essentially, that was served was Madeira. And it's a fortified wine, and it comes from a little island off the coast of Europe. And the reason it was served because it was tough enough to last the voyage, the heat and the rough seas, and normal wines wouldn't. But Thomas Jefferson found a way to get wines that, as you say, that we enjoy easily here today, all the way across the ocean.
And that's what's so great about this book, is we learn all types of the great details like that. Richard Nixon preferred European wines, and it's interesting. I happen to have a friend who was a president who said sometimes if you got a chance to just do something, like choose something and do something on your own, it was so great because, as you know, you have a staff that does everything for you. President Nixon, I would imagine, really enjoyed picking his own wines.
Yes, and that was one of the surprises that I learned in writing this book. President Nixon, of course, had grown up in very humble means. He was from a Quaker family, and alcohol was not part of his early life, but he studied hard and he spent a lot of time learning about the different wines and regions of the world. And he applied that knowledge when foreign visitors would come. He would spend time thinking about what the best wine would be to serve to that visitor at a state visit. So he was hands-on involved in that.
Go to the upstairs and there are refreshments. We can't offer you moonshine, we can't offer you Irish whiskey, but there is California champagne. Watch out.
There's a thing called pulling a Nixon. What does that mean?
Yes. I had heard this, and you probably have too, Deborah, over the years, this rumor that President Nixon would have two different wines. He would pick a great wine for his guests at a state function, and then there would be a separate wine steward with a separate bottle with a towel around it, so you couldn't see the label. and that bottle would be only for the use of President Nixon. That story had been going on for decades, and I'd heard both sides saying it's true, it's not true, and I finally found from no source less than Woodward and Bernstein in their investigative book called The Final Days, they determined that in fact Nixon did do that, and it's been called since in pulling a Nixon.
President Reagan was from a wine-producing state, but also understood how wine and diplomacy went hand in hand.
Yes, he of course was governor of California when California was really becoming a wine power. And when he came to the White House, he brought a major emphasis on serving American wines and particularly California wines. But I think that the situation that you're aware of, it was when the president of France, Jacques Chirac, who had also been a longtime friend of Ronald Reagan's, both had an appreciation for wine. So here comes the president of France to the White House, the wine superpower, France. And here's the American president who wants to showcase the best of America, as all presidents do at state dinners.
By the way, I hope you all enjoyed this evening's dinner wine. You see, it was produced in California as part of a joint French-American venture.
The famous American winemaker Robert Mondavi and Philippe de Rothschild, the famous Chateau Mouton Rothschild owner in France. It was called Opus One. And he served it at that dinner, and it was the perfect diplomatic touch.
The Stag's Leap Chardonnay was one that was served as well at the White House.
Yes, a favorite, one of the great California winemakers. And the Stag's Leap, of course, goes all the way back to that 1976 tasting where French wines were compared against American wines in a blind tasting by the best of the French winemakers. And in a blind tasting, the American wines won, and Stag's Leap was one of those wines.
One of the other things that you have to do when you study wine and you deal in wine is basically learn a number of foreign languages. So I'm probably going to butcher this one right here. The Schramsberg Cremant Demisec Sparkling.
Yes, Schramsberg sparkling wine has been served more than any wine in the history of the White House. You mentioned President Nixon and his attention to detail when it came to wine. When he did his famous trip to China in 1972 that opened up China and the United States, he wanted to bring the right wine to celebrate the occasion, and he brought a bottle of Schramsberg sparkling wine.
3 weeks later, they found out from a friend who was watching the Today Show one morning, turn on the television, Jack and Jamie, Barbara Walters has just explained that the Schramsberg blank to blank was served in Beijing, China by President Nixon to Chow Enlai. Big deal.
And it's been served by virtually every president since then.
I remember when Texas was looking at diversifying in the 80s when we had issues with the price of oil. They said we have to diversify everywhere we can. You know what? We can grow a grape. We can do wines here in Texas as well, right? And so, of course, with George W., a wine came to the White House with him, too, from Texas.
Yes, he was terrific. And although a non-drinker himself, First Lady Laura Bush took care of every detail to make sure every state dinner and every official function was done with just the maximum attention to making sure everything was right. And they did, the Bushes did showcase Texas wine on several occasions at important events at the White House.
You put every detail into this book, including the cover, which has a great point of view to it as well.
What I wanted to do is give the reader the sense that they are sitting in the president's seat at a state dinner. And that cover pulled bits and pieces together from various state dinners, official state dinners, and even that decanter that's sitting in the front. Typically, there's not a decanter sitting in front of the President of the United States, but that was an example of the great glassware. It goes all the way back to President Madison. And then you'll also notice you usually don't fill every wine glass at once because you serve the wine with each course. But in the photo, we filled them all up because we wanted to give you the feeling that there was a lot of wine being served.
Well, Fred, thank you so much. I love the book, Wine and the White House, A History. It's a beautiful book, but also, like I said, you get to learn some things. And so Shakespeare said there are sermons in stones. I found a sermon in your wines.
Thank you, Deborah. Pleasure to be with you.